Hello and welcome to a very special Monday afternoon edition of Establish the Show. My name is Adam Levitan, joined by your normal Showdown Kings, Gary Hartman and Cody Main. Two game slates play a little bit like a showdown in that in order to win, in order to have optimal teams, we're going to need to find some leverage somewhere, and it's going to be in the form of some very uncomfortable thin plays, just like we do on Showdown. Cody, how's it going today?
I'm good. I feel like we brought you out of short slate retirement, so I'm happy to have you back on the show for this two-game slate. I am a little bit disappointed that they completely nuked the Showdown offering, so apologies for not having the normal Showdown content, but definitely focused on the two-game slate tonight.
Yeah, all the action is going to be on the two-game slate here tonight, which I actually think is right. Despite the explosion of popularity of Showdown, I still think the general people probably prefer a two-gamer. I don't know. That'd be an interesting poll. Showdown has gotten crazy popular, though. Anyways, I digress. Gary, how's it going?
Yeah, it's good. Very excited to have you back on the show, Adam, for what we can only call a really exciting reunion for all the people and the Giants on primetime. I know people have missed it over the last month or so, and Tommy Cutlets is ready to grace your screens this evening.
Indeed he is. All right, we are going to go position by position through tonight's main slate. Before we get into it, if you do not have an ESPN Bet account, I'm not that into betting sports like that, but my God, this offer, if you use promo code ETR when you sign up, they will give you $5 $50 bonus bets, aka free bets on ESPN Bet. All you have to do to get them is sign up, promo code ETR, deposit at least $10, make a wager of at least $1, and you get those bets, and then you can withdraw after you're done with those bets. It's really a crazy offer if you want to play it like that. All right. An overall theme of this slate, I think, guys, is that people are just going to try to put in as many Packers and as many Dolphins as they can into their teams. What you get on the Packers side is you remove Christian Watson and you get them going very pass heavy over the last 2, 3, 4 games. You also get Jordan Love playing at a high level. You also remove Aaron Jones. And so you have underpriced guys in a really good matchup with Jordan Love playing really well against the Giants here tonight on a 2-game slate. So Giants stuff is going to be, Packers stuff is going to be very popular. The Dolphins guys, I wouldn't call cheap, but they're very affordable considering it's a 2-game slate and what you can get on the Packers side. So just before you go into the slate, understand that if you're playing a bunch of Packers and you're playing a bunch of Dolphins, that is what everyone else is going to do. And I think that's right from an optimal perspective. We'll talk about if it's right from a tournament perspective. Cody, any thoughts on overall construction for this slate?
Yeah, I think a couple of things to consider, and this is kind of the same theme that we discuss anytime we talk about Showdown is what type of levers do you need to pull to make sure that you have a unique lineup in especially the large field stuff, but it's going to get condensed really in a big way in the small field stuff as well. So I think a couple of things you can do is play contrarian angles from a game script perspective, get off of some of those Dolphins heavy, Packers heavy lineups, or you can consider some of the things that we've talked about on Showdown, like salary, forcing, kind of bullying the optimizer to do things that you wanted to do in order to have a unique lineup, min 1 player under 10% or min 2 players under 20%, things like that, just to kind of bully the optimizer into giving you lineups that are more likely to be unique. But I think what you need to do is just pull those levers kind of based off of the roster construction that you're fooling around with. If you have a lineup that is Packers and Dolphins heavy, you probably need to understand that you need to be a little bit more cognizant of the salary that's being used on that lineup, and also be cognizant about the pieces that you're playing within those Packers and Dolphins heavy lineups as well. So to me, it's always kind of this nuanced discussion of like, what specific things do I need to do based off of the lineup or set of lineups that I'm playing, as opposed to kind of a black and white deal. But specifically, if you're getting into that Packers and Dolphins heavy stuff, really could be considerate of the other things that you're doing in order to not have a heavily duplicated lineup.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking at one of our optimals now. It has 0 Titans. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Packers, 2 Dolphins, and then Saquon as the only Giant. On FanDuel, it's a much different discussion. You can only play 4 guys from a single team on FanDuel, even if it's a 2-game slate as it is tonight. So what you're going to get on FanDuel is way more 2 tight end with Chig and Kraft, because Chig obviously gives you a Titans player, you also get guys like Jalen Hyatt more on FanDuel, as you have to use more guys from different teams. So just wanted to put that note out there. Anyways, I think we should get into it here, Gary, with the quarterbacks before time gets away from us here. I think everybody is aware that Tua Tagovailoa is in a really good spot and is the best quarterback play on the slate. Titans have been a bit of a pass funnel. Dolphins have been outrageously efficient throwing the football in good matchups. I would consider this a good matchup. Weather in Miami looks fine. Tua on DraftKings is 1,300 more than Jordan Love. And you see, for salary adjusted, we do have Jordan Love as the better play. On FanDuel, they are just $300 apart, and Tua is clearly the better play on FanDuel. Gary, how would you think about quarterback here? I think for optimal lineups, it's almost certainly either Tua or Love.
Yeah, no doubt about it. If you're playing cash or even in small field, I'd have a hard time getting away from one of those two. The way I look at it here, even with Jordan Love's price discount on DraftKings, I think Tua is like the best quarterback option 1, 2, and 3 on this slate personally. They're favored by a good amount. I think they have one of the higher team totals on the slate. You can pass on the Titans for sure this year, big time. And, they want to keep their foot on the gas. The Ravens won this week. Like, they have every reason to want to win this game and win it convincingly. All the Tyreek narratives. I think that he by far has the highest ceiling of any quarterback on this slate. So I am most interested in Tua personally. I have no issues getting into Love for the salary stuff, but I'd play Tua heavily tonight, and I would look to get over the field in tournaments too. I think he's that much better than everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, our optimals are going to have a mix of Love and Tua, depending on what you want to spend on. If you're willing to play some of these cheap Giants receivers, like we'll get to, you're more likely to be able to fit Tua. If you're not willing to play those guys and you want to get up into the Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs range more at wide receiver, then you likely have to play Jordan Love, which fits from a correlation perspective. Also, obviously, because of quarterback wide receiver stacking. So anyways, I think it's an interesting conversation there. Cody, how would you think about quarterback at the top here? We currently have Tua for 41% in large field tournaments, Jordan Love for 32%.
Yeah, Gary and I do a lot of agreeing on this show, and I'm kind of in lockstep with him on Tua as the best overall quarterback. Even after factoring in price and ownership here, I still think he's the best quarterback. I will say that, kind of looking at our ownership projections right now, and we'll dial things in after the show, of course, but I think there's an argument to be made here that we're looking at 13.3% on Tommy Cutlets, 13.6% on Will Levis. I actually think both of those are probably going to come down into the sub 10% range. You can afford to get some of that ownership projection into Tua a little bit more. And I think you're probably going to end up looking at like 45, 50% on Tua, probably 35-ish% on Jordan Love. And really, those last two guys are going to account for like 10 to 15% total ownership. Certainly in some of the smaller field stuff, you might see like 10% combined ownership on Levis and Tommy DeVito. I mean, we're talking about a 2-game slate here with only 4 quarterbacks in play. At some point, it becomes much more interesting, but I just think there's such a discrepancy here at the quarterback position that I will just side with kind of the field here and say that 42%, 45%, wherever it may land on Tua is probably right. And then I'll find ways to get different elsewhere, mostly at, the tight end and wide receiver position.
Okay. I do think that if you're playing a bunch of lineups or you're playing large field, you have to at least consider DeVito and Levis. We have projection roughly equal on these guys. I think for Levis, I think what the Titans will want to do in this game is establish it like hard, come out and you can run on the Dolphins, I actually think it's a reasonable matchup for them. And if Miami's offense wasn't so explosive, I'd actually like Derrick Henry here a little bit. The problem for me with Derrick Henry, who we'll get to in a second, is how long can they stick with him while Tyreek and Waddle and Tua are shoving touchdowns and Achane are shoving touchdowns down their throat, right? And so I think you'll get an early run-heavy game plan from the Titans and Will Levis. But as the game goes on, they're going to get into some known passing situations. On the other side, I don't think it's crazy. Gary is the Giants laundry bro. I don't think it's crazy to think that this game will be closer than people think, especially if you think that Jordan Love's recent hot streak is a mirage and not the real deal. So, Gary, who would you prefer out of Mr. DeVito versus Mr. Levis for tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, you could make an argument for either guy, right? Only 6-point spread in the Giants-Packers game. You could say the Giants are at home. Maybe they're the ones that keep this game closer. It's a more competitive game, and DeVito's effective. Where your Levis argument is purely game script. They have to throw. I prefer DeVito, and that's not a Giants bias. I wish they went back to Tyrod Taylor if I was really thinking the Giants could be winning games, but I do prefer DeVito in this spot. I'll say this too, like just from a macro point, I haven't done a deep dive on 2-game slates, but I did go look back on the first and second weeks of this year when there were 2-game Monday night slates. I think more often than not, a player from every team appears, and I think it's a valuable point. But when it doesn't happen, like in week 1 of this year, is when a team gets absolutely blown out. Like the Giants got blown out by the Cowboys in week 1, right? 40 to whatever, 3 or something. And there was no Giants on the optimal slate. There was like 5 Cowboys, and there was whoever the other game was. It was Jets and Bills, right? There was 3 Jets, 2 Bills, like 5 Cowboys, no Giants. I think the Titans are the more likely team for that to happen tonight than the Giants in a 37-point game with some cheap receiver options. So it's just something to consider, which is all just another reason for me to be leaning more into DeVito. And if I were to play a Titan tonight, I think I'd want it to be more of a position bring back than trying to get cute with the Levis stacks. Now, something I'd sometimes do on main slates is play the lesser quarterback and just treat it like the more expensive quarterback, meaning I want a Dolphins double. I just want to lean into this game going way over. Maybe I play Levis instead of Tua, something like that. Even when they scored 70 points this year, Tua was not optimal that week. So you could make that argument, but I just don't think Levis has the ceiling for that to hit in a big way personally. So roundabout way for me to say I prefer DeVito, but it's kind of close.
Yeah, I prefer DeVito too. If going down there, if I was playing a lot of lineups, I'd probably mix in all 4 quarterbacks on this slate, but would certainly have a lesser allocation to DeVito and Levis. One thing I was thinking, Cody, is that a lot of people are going to come out and be like, oh, I'll just play Tua doubles, right? I'll just play Tua, Waddle, Tyreek, and figure the rest out. It is very hard to do that on DraftKings. You can certainly do it on FanDuel, though. And so I would just encourage people to be aware of that. If you're playing on FanDuel, the Tua doubles are pretty much the optimal, I think, on FanDuel. On DraftKings, it's very hard to fit. So yeah, any other thoughts on stacking and quarterbacks or anything else on quarterback, Cody?
Yeah, I think the one thing to consider, and whether it's with Tua or Love, or if you're getting into some of these other guys, like the point that Gary brought up, I think is an interesting one. And I think it's mostly going to be done on the Dolphins side, but like onslaughting with your quarterback and just hoping that they're the one offense that goes off. We've talked about it on 2-game slates past, but if you get the one team that ends up going for 35 or 42 points, in this instance, most likely going to be the Dolphins there, you're going to want multiple pieces from that offense, kind of regardless of how the salary structure shakes out. So I would not shy away from double stacking with a running back, triple stacking with a running back, double stacking with 2 running backs, that type of thing, just in that hopes that you hit on that one offense that is the one that goes off.
Yep. All right. Running back is super interesting. I just want to start with the Miami discussion because I think it's probably the most important discussion. Raheem Mostert will start this game. Raheem Mostert last week in the first half, before the game got out of hand, had 10 opportunities. Devon Achane only had 5. In the second half, it was all Achane. I believe he outsnapped Mostert 23-4. The game wasn't particularly close. They barely played Jeff Wilson in the entire game at all until the very last drive. And so I think that Achane proved his health and did enough to make it more of an even split if this game is competitive. I was encouraged, though, that the Dolphins allowed Achane to stay out there and rack up huge numbers last week in his first game off injury and not worry about it, right? They were up like 20, 25, 30 points, and Achane was out there running. So even if they blow out, I think Achane is still strong, and that's one of the reasons that we have a better projection on Achane than Mostert here. Another reason, of course, is that Achane is just outrageously explosive and more explosive than Raheem Mostert. But yeah, salary gap here, Gary, is at more than 2 to ownership gap right here is at more than 2 to 1. That strikes me as maybe overboard. I don't want to say anything bad about Devon Achane, though. So what do you think about Miami backfield tonight?
Yeah, that's my thought too. My eyes got wide when I saw, like, I agree, especially with the ceiling projection difference, right? I think there's no doubt Devon Achane has the highest ceiling of any running back here, particularly on this Dolphins team. We've seen it every game he's played. He's put up massive scores for the most part. But that base projection is where, if you're trying to potentially make an argument for Mostert, and we've seen these short yardage touchdowns all year. If first half they get up big, maybe they get down to the one, maybe there's pass interferences. Like I could just see a case where Mostert ends up with 3 touchdowns in this game, and enough of the time where we shouldn't have half the ownership of Devon Achane. Now, you can play them together, like Cody mentioned. We can look at this as showdown style for sure. I don't know how often I would do it here because I want to lean into the Dolphins pass game, but we've seen these just outbursts from the Miami offense where everyone's getting there. I, as like a full-on GPP bro hat on, I don't know if I'm fully flipping the Achane Mostert ownership. I think Achane's too explosive with too much of a ceiling to consider that. But would I lessen that gap? I certainly would.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's interesting. I think playing both of them together, I would probably do it at a higher rate. I just don't think many people are going to do it because everyone's playing Tyreek and everybody wants to play Tua. And if Tua only throws for 1 touchdown and 250 yards and Tyreek only has 95 yards and 1 touchdown, you might be able to get away with not having those guys and then hope that Achane and Mostert combine for 3 rushing touchdowns or 4 rushing touchdowns. That's like a kind of thing that I would never do on a main slate, but is super interesting, I think, for showdown or for 2-game slate. So yeah, anything else on Miami backfield, Cody, before we move on?
Yeah, I think even as you zoom out a little bit more on this Achane Mostert split, and Achane's been in and out of the lineup, but this has kind of been like Raheem Mostert's backfield in the first half, and when the game's close, then it kind of seems like Achane does a ton of damage after the game kind of gets out of hand. It is tough to say anything bad about him, but I kind of agree with you guys that I think the split on ownership is a little bit too wide. Agree again with Gary, not that I would go necessarily as far as to say I would flip these 2 ownerships in terms of my personal exposure, but I think there is a couple of interesting ways to play this backfield, and the one you guys alluded to is to play them both together. I think the other interesting angle is to just not play either of them. I think there's a couple of other good running back options we'll talk about in a second here. But this is still a really good Tennessee run defense. The way to beat Tennessee has been through the air. I know they're without Jeffrey Simmons now. They haven't been as stout as they were at the beginning of the season, but still a team that's top of the league in explosive rush rate allowed, top of the league in stuff rate, all of those metrics that we generally look at. I think you could build a case that maybe Tua and the passing attacks is just the reason why this gets done, and maybe they eat into each other's workload enough that neither of them end up being optimal. I know that's a really scary proposition on a 2-game slate, but I think that's maybe one interesting way to play this backfield.
So what Cody's talking about is effectively changing the game script, I think. And one way you could change the game script is, what if you say this is a wild outcome? Same thing that way you would think about an SGP or showdown. It's like, this outcome doesn't happen very often, but when it does, how much can I win? And you can win a lot. So I don't think Tennessee hangs with Miami very often. I don't think Tennessee keeps it close or gets a lead very often. But if they do, and you have Derrick Henry and he goes nuts and it's a muted game for Tua in the pass game, I mean, you can start flipping things very interestingly there. On ownership in this Tennessee backfield, I think we need to come up on Spears, because the game script that everybody has in mind is that Tennessee is going to get absolutely trucked. And when they get trucked, Tajay Spears comes in there and Tajay Spears catches a bunch of balls and he gets a bunch of draws and he gets a bunch of screens when the game's out of hand. And I get that narrative. That's probably the narrative that it would be in my head also. But I think the field is going to be onto that. So I think we need to get Spears a little bit higher here, even though he's expensive. Henry, to me, again, I think Henry has a really good matchup. I think if they keep it close, Henry will have a really good game. But I don't know that they can keep it close. And so as part of optimals, I would not have Henry. I would have Mostert, Achane, Barkley all ahead of Henry for me at the running back position. So yeah, Gary, any thoughts on, let's start with Cody this time. Actually, Cody, any thoughts on Titans backfield here?
Yeah, you brought up a really good point. There's a really, really clear case to be made on Derrick Henry getting squeezed out here. And I think the point you alluded to with Tajay being the obvious pass down back is going to be a big reason why you start to pull off 4 or 5% ownership to give to Tajay for anyone that wants to play into the kind of game script narrative. And then you pull another 4 to 5% to get to everybody's favorite eye candy in Devon Achane. And then you can pull even a little bit more to give to some of these guys that we'll talk about in a second at wide receiver who are expensive. I think the $6,500 tag on Henry is part of the reason why he's going to be so attractive and end up coming in probably closer to the 20% range, 25% range than the 35% range that we have. And, it's not really a bet on an awesome roll, because from a pass game perspective, especially on, PPR friendly sites like DraftKings, not much there for Derrick Henry. He is a 14-point road dog. I mean, all the negatives that you could say about Derrick Henry are quite obvious, but on the flip side of that coin, if you think this game stays a little bit closer than Vegas is indicating with a 14-point spread, and part of the reason why they do that is because of Derrick Henry on the ground, I think pretty interesting case to be made here as either a bring back or just kind of a standalone piece in and of itself with Derrick Henry being the opposite end of that, Miami, Tennessee game staying a little bit closer than we expect.
Yeah, agreed. All right, we better get moving a little bit faster here. Otherwise, we're going to be here all day. Gary, let's go to the Giants backfield here. We know what's going to happen. Saquon's usage is going to be absolutely awesome. I think it's a reasonable matchup for Saquon. I like Saquon, man. I think this game has a potential to get a little bit looser and a little bit more high scoring than maybe the market thinks. And in some of these wild games, you can see Saquon making big plays. So I do prefer Saquon straight up over Derrick Henry, even for the 600 more. Gary, what do you think the chances are of Saquon finding a ceiling game here against the Packers?
Yeah, to me, this one's cut and dry. Saquon is of interest to me for sure. I want plenty of exposure. The workload has been excellent. The matchup isn't bad. At home, seems to be finding a little bit of a groove again. And it's just such a dominant bell cow role, right? Breida will come in for his couple series. I know we don't, if this is a 1 game slate, we could talk ourselves into Matt Breida. I don't even think I'm really interested in going there on this 2 game slate. Like, I'd rather find the money for Spears, or even like give me some Patrick Taylor or something on the other side, or the Packers RB2 instead of getting into Breida. So this one's really just interest in Barkley. Now, would I get up to the ownership? Yeah, I think if that's where my build ended up, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I think, especially if you want to say, hey, let me lean into either the Dolphins pass game and kind of fade the Dolphins running backs. Well, if you're doing that, you're probably going to end up over the field on Saquon. So I'm not saying that is the right way to play, but if you do want to play that, that's probably where you get into Saquon more.
Saquon gets into like a ton of our optimals. I mean, a ton, and like, I think that's right. If I was playing cash or any small field stuff, I think you need to strongly consider Saquon. The Breida thing, I agree with Gary. If I was like a full-blown GPP bro, I don't think I'd rule Breida out, but man, it's hard to see it on Breida where you can see it on a lot of the other backup running backs. Other side of this game, I actually thought Aaron Jones was going to play. Was limited participant in practice all week. Turns out he's not going to be able to play. So we get AJ Dillon, the featured role again. Patrick Taylor, kind of a pass game specialist, somewhat backing him up. AJ Dillon has been terrible this year. Matchup is very good though, and he's going to fit a ton of builds. If you want to play Tyreek at 9,200, pretty much if you want to play anything, AJ Dillon's going to fit the build a ton at his projection just based on volume. Now, we get into these spots, Cody, where you can say, well, he's only a bet on volume. He sucks. He doesn't have a great pass game role, blah, blah, blah. It goes for an mix for an interesting fade. I don't know. I'm tempted to go for an AJ Dillon fade here in some Giants heavy scripts. What do you think about Packers backfield?
Yeah, I feel like we've painted a lot of bull cases on a lot of these running backs. I think it's for good reason. And I think as a result, you're going to end up seeing 3 running back be quite popular because of some of the names that we've talked about and some of the price tags that we've talked about. It just seems like within AJ Dillon's range of outcomes, there's a lot of like 16 to 18 touches for 80 yards. And if he doesn't fall in the end zone on those 16 to 18 touches and 80 yards, then you're probably pretty happy with the fade. Problem here is they're 6-point favorites against a pretty bad Giants team, expected to score a lot of points, and he's probably as likely as anybody else on the slate to score against a Giants defense that has been very forgiving against opposing running backs, allowing the 3rd highest explosive rush rate in the league this season. So it kind of all points in the direction of another good spot for another running back. But I do think of the ones we've discussed, he might be the most interesting fade candidate because you can see a good game. I think there's plenty of outcomes here where he doesn't absolutely blow the lid off and you're okay fading that in a game where he just racks up volume between the 20s. And as long as he doesn't find the end zone, you're probably okay.
I'd be playing AJ Dillon in cash. Let's put it that way. At this price with AJ Dillon's role, I'd be playing AJ Dillon in cash at 55% and maybe more. It starts to get a bit uncomfortable for me. We've seen running backs with good roles and good offenses fail. I mean, Zach Moss has failed twice in a row despite outrageous usage. CEH had a really good role yesterday, only had 8 DraftKings points. I do think Patrick Taylor is interesting to mix through. He will not be on. We're going to come up plenty on that 0.6 ownership here. He's going to be played, obviously, but probably not a ton because he is expensive. He's just so close to AJ Dillon and is going to play, a fraction of what AJ Dillon plays.
Yeah. I'll just throw in, I like Dillon, I think, a little bit more than you guys. Just, speaking of volume and matchup, when you combine the two, it looks really good, right? 14 carries, 18 carries each of the last 3 games. Efficiency going up, 2.1, 3.1, 4.1 yards per carry. Still not good. Still hasn't cracked any ceiling games, but from Connecticut, not too far from here. Nice Jewish boy like myself. Hanukkah, home narrative, favorites, cold weather. I'm craning all the AJ Dillon narratives.
And he was a former guest on this very YouTube channel.
Exactly. So maybe I just want to be bullish on AJ Dillon against my Giants, but I think there's a chance he hits tonight.
Yeah, certainly a really good matchup for AJ Dillon. Yeah, I do think that he's going to be owned, and 55% might even be light on AJ Dillon. I want to go to Packers receivers while we're talking about Packers here, because this is one of the most important parts of the slate. And to somebody asked the question here in chat, Robert said, does a Jordan Love plus 3 pass catchers get you different enough in a GPP? I have bad news for you, Robert. On DraftKings, our second optimal currently includes Jordan Love, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft, AJ Dillon. So no, I don't think it is going to get you different enough is the bottom line. Packers doubles, Packers triples are like most of our optimals right now because Christian Watson is out. All these guys are priced if Christian Watson is in, and you get a really good matchup here against the Giants. So these guys are going to be very popular. My favorite of the 3 is Jaden Reed. I think Wicks, you can make a case, is the most underpriced, and Dobbs is like the steadiest, best red zone bet. But I still think Reed is my favorite of the 3. Most juice, gets some carries, gets the easy target. So yeah, Reed at 4,700 for me would be the best. And then I don't think you can rule out Heath either at 3,200 as the 4th wide receiver here. So yeah, Cody, how do you think about Packers wide receiver?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in lockstep with you here as well. I will say that my preseason bias might be showing a little bit. I'm kind of bullish on Dontavian Wicks, and I think at price where I kind of want to jam in some of these studs, of course, I'm going to be on Tyreek, already talked about Tua, going to be on the expensive running backs here. I think that savings, the $900 from Reed and the $1,200 from Dobbs, where they're roughly the same ownership or kind of project around the same ownership, I think Wicks is pretty interesting. Going to be in line for a huge role here. He's been able to play outside and in line and has really been a good target earner, whether Christian Watson's been on the field or Jaden Reed's been on the field or Romeo Dobbs has been on the field. He's kind of been a consistent target earner, just has not yet gotten the route volume. So I think now that we're going to expect his routes to come up to roughly a full-time player, in that 65, 75% range, I think there's a case to be made that he could lead the team in targets tonight and be the cheapest guy. And he's been pretty efficient when he's been on the field. So I do like Dontavian Wicks quite a bit tonight.
Yeah, I like Wicks a lot as well. It would not shock me at all if Wicks is the highest scoring Packers wide receiver tonight. On the other side, Gary, people are calling Jalen Hyatt in the same breath as Jameson Williams and Marvin Mims and Quentin Johnston and all these guys who we want to play more, we want to produce more, but don't do it, except for the fact that in the game before the bye, Jalen Hyatt had an awesome game against the New England Patriots, went over 100 yards. Now they get the bye. Like, it just makes sense for them to continue to expand Jalen Hyatt's role. He ran 23 routes on 33 DeVito dropbacks in that game before the bye. I don't think it can get worse than that. It can certainly get better than that. And so the way we have it projected, though, is with Slayton, Wandale, Hyatt pretty even, and then Shepard, Hodgins, Paris, and by the way, Paris is questionable for this game at best, well behind him. So I don't know, Gary. I think we need to come way up on Hyatt ownership. There's a ton of buzz. People want to play him. Is it wish casting? It would fit the narrative of a rookie wide receiver coming out of the bye to be featured more. That would fit the rookie wide receiver narrative.
Yeah, I don't think he's at all the same as like Marvin Mims or anything like that. Like, I think this coaching staff has shown a willingness to want to start to play him more, get him involved. Even before Tyrod and Daniel Jones went down, like right at the very end of that whole run, he was starting to get a little bit more work. Then he fell back into the background. Now he's back again. Led all Giants in targets in that week 12 game, played around 60% of snaps. I only see that going up. And I think if you're looking for salary saving on this slate, I think Hyatt and Darius Slayton are the best. on the entire slate. Wandale, I think, is your cash play of choice. I think there's always a floor there with Wandale. I very much question the ceiling, but I like Hyatt as by just far the most talented big play receiver on the slate. And even if he gets steamed up a little bit, right now we have 12% ownership on DraftKings. Like, I don't know, if it gets into the low 20s, like I'm still pretty good with that on Hyatt. I think it's just very clearly the best ceiling play. We see these Slayton games every so often as well, but I just would rather lean into the younger, more exciting prospect with a bigger playability in Hyatt.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? And one thing that I've been encouraged by with Daboll was even with DeVito out there, and DeVito has been very ineffective. Yeah, it's fun, the cutlets and the whatever. He's been outrageously ineffective and taking sacks at a rate that like is breaking our models. Like this guy is taking sacks at a ridiculous rate. His EP, I mean, he's just a mess, right? But Daboll has still been like, let's throw it. Their pass rate over expectation has been positive or neutral. And so that bodes well, I think, for Hyatt and Slayton and Wandale. The only thing I disagree with that Gary said is my favorite punt is Wicks. I would play Wicks over Slayton or Hyatt. But he is 400 more than Hyatt, 500 more than Slayton is Mr. Wicks. Okay. Miami. So DraftKings refuses to lower Jalen Waddle's price. Like on no planet should Jalen Waddle at this point be just 1,700 less than Tyreek Hill. On FanDuel, it's way different. They have Jalen Waddle priced pretty cheaply, and Tyreek Hill is an outrage. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone at wide receiver position 10,200 on FanDuel. So you're talking about 3,100 difference there between Waddle and Tyreek. But on DraftKings, it's so close that Waddle's ownership is actually going to get muted. And it's become a running joke in the DFS community that everybody keeps saying, oh, easy leverage. Well, I'll overpay for Waddle and I'll get leverage on all the Tyreek people. Problem is, Tyreek is going for 2,000 yards. The coaching staff knows it. Tyreek knows it. He's absolutely unstoppable. They're trying to win games. And Tyreek just keeps icing Waddle every single week. So, Cody, how do you feel about Miami tonight, wide receiver position?
Yeah, I think this is a spot, like you said, Tyreek should probably be above 5 figures on DraftKings, and maybe Waddle's tag, given the matchup and given the discrepancy in the team totals and everything, maybe Waddle's tag at 75 is okay. But yeah, there should be a wider gap between those two. And I think for that reason, you're going to see the field rightfully load up again on Tyreek. Our 73.3% projected ownership is likely going to creep up, I think, closer to 80%, maybe even north of that. Just kind of seems like the one spot to set it and forget it and then kind of figure out everything else around it. So I think that's going to come up there. And you can't say anything bad about Tyreek at this point, whether it's in terms of volume or efficiency or the record chasing. I mean, there's really been 1, 2, maybe 3 games all season where you would have been happy with a Tyreek fade out of 12 or 13 that he's played. So I think that at this point on a 2-game slate, the best player on the slate, I think you kind of just, for me, the way that I like to play, load it up, forget about it. It doesn't necessarily need to be a lock button type situation, but I think the way that you're running your optimizers, you're probably going to end up somewhere close to that anyway. The more interesting discussion, I think, right, is Waddle. The underlying usage has been relatively good for him. 22% target share on the season, 28% air yard share. Obviously, a very efficient offense that's scoring a ton of points. We've really only seen one ceiling type performance, and even then, it was 25 DraftKings points. That's probably enough to get it done on this slate. But you're looking at a lot of low to mid-teens performances from Jalen Waddle, and I feel like that's kind of what you're going to get here again. Is that enough? I guess becomes the question at 7,500. Or would you be more happy with some of these other guys in order to allow you to load up on some of those mid-tier running backs? So I don't know. I feel like 48.8% where we have it right now is probably a touch more than I'm comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily get the sense that it's going to squeeze out. So I kind of think that this is another one where you run it and whatever you end up with in terms of your Waddle exposure is probably okay. But I think if you told me he scored 15 or 16 DraftKings points before the slate started, I would probably just end up coming in under that 48.8% and probably be pretty happy with it.
I mean, you're not going to get a lot of Waddle running optimals, right? And that's kind of why I think that his ownership will stay down. Out of our top 20 teams right now, only 2 of them on DraftKings, out of our top 20 teams, only 2 of them have Jalen Waddle. So I actually think that we're fine on ownership on Waddle. It could even come down. I'm interested in forcing in Tua doubles on DraftKings specifically, not on FanDuel where that's like the optimal, but on DraftKings, Tua doubles I think is super interesting because I don't think many people are going to play it. It's hard to get to, but you can jam in some stuff and figure it out with some cheap guys. The other guy on Miami that I would mention is Braxton Berrios did play ahead of Cedric Wilson last week in terms of routes run. Braxton Berrios, everybody probably remembers him from the Jets, slot receiver. If there was an injury in game to Tyreek or Waddle, it would be Cedric Wilson, I think, taking over their role. But in terms of when they go to 3 wide receiver sets, I think it will be Mr. Berrios. So just wanted to put that one out there at 3K. Last wide receiver unit to hit on here, Gary, is indeed the Tennessee Titans. Traylon Burks has been a massive disappointment. They're also mixing NWI and Chris Moore through here. I think DeAndre Hopkins is dominating targets, not because he's really good at this point in his career, but because they have no one else to go to, which isn't a ringing endorsement. But yeah, what do you think about Titans wide receivers here tonight?
Yeah, this one's pretty easy for me because we do have value on the Giants and the Packers from a receiver standpoint. There are bringbacks on the Titans that I prefer in the form of Chig because tight end sucks, and the form of Tyjae Spears. I think this is DeAndre Hopkins or bust for me. Like, I think I'm pretty, I mean, sure, if you're 150ing, you want to throw NWI in your pool, I guess you could throw Traylon Burks in your pool, but I'm pretty comfortable paying up to Hyatt, Slayton, Wicks as my value receivers here and kind of ignoring these Tennessee guys.
Yeah, if this was Showdown, I would say we have to mix these guys through. I don't know, Cody, on a 2-game, do you think we have to mix Burks, Westbrook, Akine, Chris Moore through in large field stuff?
Man, really outside of 150, I'm with Gary. I don't think you necessarily need to. And back to an earlier point that I wanted to mention on Hyatt and Hyatt. I think Hyatt specifically, you mentioned his ownership coming up. I think that's going to come from NWI. I don't see 1.5% less of the entries on DraftKings large field tournament coming to NWI versus Jalen Hyatt. So I think, maybe we end up with like 5% on Westbrook Akine and up to like 16% on Hyatt. Sure, these guys offer some sort of like uniqueness factor, but to try and decide which one is which, I think they all just kind of amount to MME dart throws. And by the time you set your rules in the optimizer, you'll end up with what exposure you want to get of them. I suspect most of the time it's going to be around 5% or less.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the best argument for those guys is in game scripts that you're playing where Miami absolutely smashes. It's like 30-10, and Levis drops back and he finds NWI. Like we see in Showdown all the time.
Yeah.
These last drives change everything in Showdown, every single slate, and would not shock me if that happens on this 2-game slate as well. Last point I wanted to make on wide receiver here. Salary cap is so loose. Like, on DraftKings, you can do almost anything you want. When you can do almost anything you want, everybody's going to get Tyreek. Ham builders, sim bros, opto bros, everyone is going to get Tyreek. So yeah, we definitely need to come up on Tyreek ownership here. All right. Gary mentioned tight end is a disaster. The two that stick out, of course, are Tucker Kraft, who has a full-time role subbing for Luke Musgrave, and then Chig Okonkwo, who's actually come on lately. Now, Chig is used more of a pass catcher than a full-time player. That's okay. That's okay. And he's been much better lately. The other guys on this slate at tight end are just a mess. I mean, Bellinger was sick, missed a lot of practice this week. Darren Waller's not back. Durham Smythe has been terrible at earning targets. And then you get all the backups and dust balls here. So yeah, Cody, how do you think about tight end as a whole here tonight?
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious from an optimal perspective. You're probably looking at Chig 3,100. In the pass catching role, going to be on a team that doesn't have wide receivers that are commanding a massive target share. He's developing into this, or at least starting to play this more pass friendly tight end type role. Has been good at it over the last couple of weeks. I think you probably just load up Chig or Tucker Kraft, who has been in a full-time role now, also in a good matchup. Quarterbacks playing well, rarely going to come off the field. I think from a large field perspective, like maybe the optimal way to play this is say, okay, we're going to get nearly 100% of the combined, 110, 115% total ownership at the tight end position on two guys that are very likely to score, 6 to 9 DraftKings points or somewhere in that range, and very unlikely to separate in a massive way that completely buries you if you don't have them. I think an interesting way to play this and an interesting way to get unique in large field tournaments is to take shots on these total dust balls. So I'm not even talking, certainly Bellinger at 11%, Durham Smythe at 5.5% kind of make that argument too. But I think guys that are like 0% owned, 0.5% owned, we talk about what we see on single game slates all the time. It wouldn't shock me if one of these guys that's out there for 15 to 25% of their team's routes runs into a 10-yard reception for a touchdown and is the highest scoring tight end. I think that's one way to separate. If the rest of these guys score, 5, 6 DraftKings points because they're all bad, and you get the one guy that scores a touchdown that's completely unknown, that's one way to totally separate in, especially the super, super large field stuff. So I think from, again, an optimal perspective, you're looking at Chig or Tucker Kraft and not really considering much else. From a large field MME type perspective, I think the rest of these guys are really, really interesting, and a way to get different on the slate where getting different is hugely valuable.
Yeah, I would say Smythe would probably be my favorite of those type of plays there. I would say this: Bellinger is listed questionable. I think he's going to play, but if he doesn't, Lawrence Cager is a pass catcher, not really a blocking tight end. So I think Cager would be interesting if Bellinger were to miss. Gary, any tight end thoughts before we move on here?
No, Cager was going to be the name I brought up, but I will just say I think Cody's take is super sharp, right? I mean, we've seen some ugly tight end pools on small slates before. This might be the ugliest one I've ever seen, where Chig Okonkwo is our 50% owned guy because, I mean, yeah, again, he's been better of late, but just the state of the position. So why play into a 50% owned guy or 40% owned guy with Okonkwo or Kraft when our chances of them putting up a number that'll beat you, I still think is way lower than those ownership numbers. So I do think that, like, I don't think there's a 50% chance Chig is optimal. I don't think there's a 40% chance Kraft is optimal. I think that this is a super ugly position with a bunch of punts. Why not lean into that? And if you're trying to jam as many studs as possible, this is a way to do it uniquely. So I actually, even more than I do feel about playing a 2,500 tight end on, or a min tight end on Showdown, because you don't have to play tight end. I think it's even more interesting here at no ownership. So yeah, Cager and Smythe certainly the most interesting. But man, if you want to take shots on random dudes here that are tight end 2 or 3 in jumbo packages on the goal line, be my guest.
Yep. All right. Defense. So on DraftKings, Packers is most expensive. On FanDuel, FanDuel left the Packers at just 4,100, way cheaper than the Dolphins. So if you're playing on FanDuel, Packers are going to be outrageously owned because of what I mentioned before, DeVito sack rate and how mistake prone he is. Even on DraftKings, though, at our current projections, Packers defense is optimal a ton. We have Packers defense optimal 70% of the time in our top 20 lineups, even at 3,700. And that again speaks to how loose this slate is. Now, we know defense is very volatile. I'm tempted to mix all 4 defenses in. Tennessee is a tough click considering the likeliest game script here where you're going to get a ton of runs in the second half. So Tennessee is a tough click. But the other 3, I'm certainly interested in. Cody, how do you think about playing defense tonight?
Yeah, this is another thing where I think we kind of talked about it at the quarterback position, where I think ownership will condense even more, and you see sub 10% on both Levis and Tommy DeVito. I think it'll happen here too. You can't get much lower on Titans D. I think I feel pretty good about the 3.1%, but I think Giants will probably come in around that sub 10% range. You distribute a little bit more ownership to Packers and Dolphins because we have the salary to do so. And you don't need me to tell you that the Packers and the Dolphins are both equally good plays. I think I side with the Packers, given the fact that everything you've discussed already, Adam, with the Tommy DeVito sack rate and the fact that Brian Daboll is still chucking it. I think there are really big games within the Packers' range of outcomes. Obviously, Will Levis is taking sacks too, and prone to turnovers and prone to mistakes as well. So I think the Dolphins are interesting. My favorite GPP defense of these 4 is the Giants at 2,800, and what is likely anywhere from low double digits to high single digits projected ownership. I think that is pretty interesting. This game projects to be a little bit closer. I know the Packers the Packers offensive line has been really good this season, and Jordan Love has been better of late at avoiding sacks and not turning the ball over. We're not too far removed from Jordan Love having some very, very rough games in prime time that we're very accustomed to. So I think this is an interesting spot, just kind of from an ownership perspective, with the Giants being 2,800 and somewhere in that low double-digit range.
Love that for sure. Giants defense just also coming off of, I believe it was a shutout of the New England Patriots, if I'm not.
No, they scored 7 points at the end there. But yeah, back-to-back games for the Giants of 12 DraftKings points and 23 DraftKings points for their defense. Now I get That's against the Patriots and the Commanders. Don't get me wrong. But at home, 36-point total. Yeah, Jordan Love's been playing great. But, Wink has this defense for the talent on this defense. He has it as buttoned up as it can be since, that disaster in Dallas, at least. So, yeah, I mean, I think by far, if you're not playing one of the top two, the Giants are the most interesting here.
All right. We got about 3 to 4 minutes for your guys' questions before we get to the flag plants here on this Monday 2-game slate show. For anyone who's a subscriber, we will have updated ownership projections coming probably in the next hour or so, which will, I think, help a bunch. Let's see what we got here. Jason says King GPP is back in the showdown streets. What up, Adam? What's up, Jason? Yeah, man. Hope everything is good. Sweeney, what's up, man? He says late to the party. I had a great sweat yesterday. Let's crush tonight. Appreciate you, Sweeney. Dominic makes point. AJ Dillon can catch 3 to 4 balls too. So AJ Dillon is, for a 250-pound guy, he's not bad in the pass game. He's had a really high catch rate in his career. He's no Aaron Jones, but it's a point well taken that, AJ Dillon is not a stone zero in the pass game. Sweeney says Tua does throw pick sixes. Sure. I mean, it's possible. Okay. Jared says, in a 2-game slate, what's the number of players versus your defense? I would be fine allowing a ton of players against my defense in a 2-game slate. It makes me more unique. We've seen all kinds of weird outcomes. Cody, what do you think about number of players? Would you set a rule, number of players versus your defense?
Yeah, I'm trying to think through it specifically for this slate. I think the answer is probably 5, maybe 4. But I'm trying to. I mean, if I had a Giants 4 defense versus a Jordan Love double that also had AJ Dillon in it, I'd be okay with that.
Right.
I think it's probably 4. Probably 4.
Yeah.
If you want to allow it at 5, I don't think it's going to happen too often. But I think if you had a quarterback double with the running back from that team and then had the Giants defense against it, for example, I think that's okay on a 2-game slate.
We've seen it. We've seen 3 most often. I think, even going back to that week 2 double Monday night header, it was Steelers defense with 3 Browns optimal, including it was Deshaun Watson, Jerome Ford, Amari Cooper, and that was in a bad offensive environment week. So I think you can probably get up to 1 more. I'd be surprised if we get to 5. 4 would be my number.
Okay. Let's see here. Matt says Achane and Mostert together is going to be the quote-unquote sneaky play that's super owned. You could be right. Matt. It does seem like a play that could be super owned. I don't know if the full onslaught on DraftKings will be that owned, though. Achane, Mostert, Tyreek, Smythe, and Tua. I don't even know if you can fit that, but yeah, stuff like that I think will be less owned. But you could be right there. Spurrier says, is Waller confirmed out or GTD? Waller is out for this game as far as I know. If you guys see anything different on Waller?
No, I think he's back next week. I was just digging in on some Giant stuff. Sounds like week 15 for Waller.
Gary, they want to know, since you are indeed the laundry bro, who is your favorite Giants wide receiver tonight on this slate?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just parlay this right into my flag plan if you guys don't mind.
Yes.
I think I was forecasting it. And honestly, I don't know unless when I was kind of forced to sometimes on showdown slates, I don't know the last time I've flag planted or whatever you want to say, put my flag down in any kind of content on a Giants player. But on this 2-game slate, I'll do it. Give me Jalen Hyatt tonight. I'm buying into the hype. I do not think he's the same as some of these other rookie receivers that have been just so sparingly used. The Giants have been showing a willingness to throw the ball. They should probably be playing from behind again if Jordan Love continues to play even 75% of how well he's played over the last 3 or 4 games. And Hyatt has the speed to take off the top of any defense. Matchup means literally nothing for Jalen Hyatt when he hits. Absolutely nothing. So I really like Jalen Hyatt here. The other good thing is they were, first of all, led the team in targets with 6 in week 12, but some of that was around the line of scrimmage. They were just trying to get their ball in the most explosive players' hands. You mix that with a couple deep throws, and they're going to take some deep shots. It's really my favorite of the value plays tonight. So really like Jalen Hyatt.
All right. Getting ahead.
Yeah.
Getting ahead of it with Jalen Hyatt. Yes. I've always been thinking about, I've played Jameson Williams for about 5 straight weeks now. I need to win something really big to get unstuck on Jameson Williams. So, never know how far you can go trying to get ahead of stuff. But I think this is different on Jalen Hyatt, as Gary alluded to. He's already shown in an NFL game that he can do it and do it in a big way. And they're coming out of a bye. All right. Cody, I cede you the floor for your flag plan.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna take a page out of your book here. You talk often about not trying to predict outliers, and maybe we've got a big enough sample here to say Devon Achane is an outlier. I'm gonna go ahead and say that the 10 yards per carry is not likely to continue throughout this guy's career, even if he's with Mike McDaniels in this explosive offense throughout the entirety of it. I think the gap between him and Raheem Mostert is simply too wide here. I think ultimately, in whether it be normal or abnormal game scripts, I think you're likely to see these two have very similar opportunities over a large enough sample. I think they're going to have similar opportunities tonight as well. And yet we're seeing 58% projected ownership that I think will ultimately be higher on Devon Achane. And we're seeing 25% projected ownership on Raheem Mostert. The $6,700 price tag is going to make it tough for people to want to play him if they're already playing Achane or Barkley or the rest of these guys. So I think we've got low enough projected ownership here on the 2-game slate that Raheem Mostert is going to flip it here and ultimately outscore Devon Achane and be in the optimal lineup.
All right. Like it a lot. All right. I could say Jaden Reed. I could say Dontavian Wicks. You guys know that those are some of the best plays on the slate. I am going to go and build off something that Cody talked about, the rare, almost unprecedented, perhaps fully unprecedented defense flag plan. I am going with Giants defense rising up, a festive atmosphere tonight at MetLife in East Rutherford to celebrate.
It'll be all Packers fans.
To celebrate, don't stop my narrative, to celebrate the homecoming on national television, Tommy DeVito breakout party tonight. Giants play well. They do the gabagool, whatever they're going to do. And they do it well through their defense, making life miserable for Jordan Love, who's playing without Christian Watson, without Aaron Jones, and has been very hot lately, but was horrific no less than, 5 or 6 weeks ago, was Jordan Love. And you get massive leverage there on Giants defense. Giants defense in the optimal tonight. And you save money. Giants defense in the optimal tonight, making life miserable for Jordan Love. Outright win for the Fighting Fajules or whatever they're calling the Giants now.
I've given up on my hope that they're just going to lose and take out for one of these top 3 picks at this point. Yeah. I've just given up hope.
I mean, George is on to me. I'm really just coping with my Christian Watson best ball bags at this point. I mean, this guy was going to be the nuts in the best ball playoffs, just the absolute nuts, but is what it is. All right. Jaron says,
the people are wondering, Adam. I love that question.
Which one?
Jaron's question. Yeah.
Jaron says, welcome back, Adam. Hope your son's b-ball game crushed their total of 8.5. Couldn't find it on ESPN Bet. Yes, game went over, but we lost and we did not cover either. So Books did well. What can I say? Books did well. Okay. That is going to do it for this 2-game slate breakdown. If you guys are interested in seeing our full slate breakdowns, anything else, you can always head to the subscribe tab. It is right up here. We have reduced the price of rest of season. There is also monthly and weekly options available. For Gary, for Cody, for producer Adam. I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.